Baldur's Gate 3 is an award-winning role-playing game based off of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition that takes place in 3 acts. The story follows the journey of a group or a single player and their mission to rid themselves of the Mind Flayer tadpole, ultimately accumulating and either controlling or destroying the main villain, the Netherbrain. From the moment we are introduced to Astarion as a companion character, we are distinctly aware that he is not what he seems. Attempting to jump the player and lure them into a sense of ease, the player is instantly shown that this man cannot be trusted.
To think, I was ready to decorate the ground with your innards.
Astarion is a high elf rogue with a charlatan background. This instantly tells us his proficiencies in deceit and trickery, something which will come up often throughout the game. He chooses not to reveal much in the early stages of Act 1, often keeping to himself. During his first romance scene, however, he reveals that he was in contact with a man named Cazador Zar, his previous master that carved runes into his back, of which he does not know the meaning.
A long time ago, I crossed Cazador, a powerful man in Baldur's Gate. He captured me. He composed and carved that one over the course of a night. He made a lot of revisions as he went.
You recall the sharp, complex lines of the script. It was written in the language of the Hells.
Infernal? Who knows? The bastard was insane. I'm afraid that through those ruins, somehow, Cazador might still be able to dominate me.
Clearly, Astarion is hesitant to tell us that he is a vampire, which makes sense as he is being hunted by Gur, a group of peoples that he once crossed along the way. We don't know much about Astarion at this point in time, but we do know that his past is incredibly vague, and that it seems like he was not treated very well by his master. Once Astarion is made aware by us that his runes on his back are actually written in Infernal, he seeks out the help of Raphael, a devil who we meet along the way. However, it's clear that he is desperate to know what these are, as a deal with the devil is never a good idea.
Before you go, I have a proposal of my own.
A proposal?
A long time ago, someone carved some runes into my back. I'd rather like to know what they say.
After fighting the monster that Raphael wants us to kill, we learn that the runes on Astarion's back are the key to a ritual that Cazador tends to use to ascend into something never seen before in all of Baldur's Gate, or even Faerun, the world that Baldur's Gate resides in. A vampire ascendant, which would grant him a lot more power. He would be able to walk in the sun and otherwise. Astarion seeks to take this power as his own, or rather, he thinks about it quite a bit. You can either choose to encourage this, or tell him no, that it will not be a good idea. Also during Act 2, he seems to begin to trust us more, telling us more about his backstory and about his brothers and sisters, whom he genuinely seems to care about, or at least worry about.
Cazador sired 7 spawn. Me and my 6 brothers and sisters. We were a family. Even when he was carving scars into our flesh. Special pleasure in my pain. He said my screams sounded sweetest. And now that I'm gone, I don't know. I pity the other 6.
As we journey more into the story of Baldur's Gate 3, we come across Moonrise Towers, which is the home of the first main villain of the game, aka Ketheric Thorm. Inside of Moonrise Towers, we meet Araj Obladra, who is a drow that takes special interest in blood.
I won't bite.
Oh, I'd prefer if you did. Assume he belongs to you? I'm sure he really believes that. How utterly adorable. I've dreamt of being bitten by a vampire since I was a young girl.
I'm sorry. You want to be bitten?
I'll even compensate you. A potion of legendary power that forever increases the strength of the one who consumes it. It's not for sale, but it's yours if you bite me.
I will have to decline.
Excuse me? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and you're squandering it.
I gave you my answer.
Ugh, can't you talk some sense into your obstinate charge? How very disappointing.
It becomes clear later that Astarion is not used to being allowed to choose for himself what happens to him, which is incredibly indicative of abuse and trauma that he has endured over time.
I want to thank you for what you said whilst I was in front of that vile drow. I spent 200 years using my body to lure pretty things back from my master. What I wanted, how I felt about what I was doing, it never mattered. You could have asked me to do the same. To throw myself at her. What I wanted, be damned. But you didn't. And I'm grateful.
Astarion is a character that represents human abuse and trauma. Despite being what is perceived as a strong, higher creature, he has little to no control over even his own bodily autonomy. Forced to lure women and men to their demise over and over again, tortured if he refuses to do so. Cazador is his abuser, and he is powerless to stop it. Many victims of abuse feel the same way, powerless. Told that if they wanted to, they could just walk away from it all, and yet at the end of the day, it feels like you will just be dragged back into the same situation time and time again. He continues to see himself as trapped in the same loop until he is able to kill the man that put him in this situation, or take the power of the right himself and become even stronger. A vampire who is able to walk in the sun, the one thing that he has craved his entire vampiric life. Even when given the chance to pursue a real relationship, Astarion is scared at the idea that they will only end up the same. Frightened that giving trust to someone else will make him weak, and that he will only end up being used the same he was before. In order to avoid this, Astarion uses his body to thank the main character instead of giving genuine love. Until he has shown that he can put genuine trust into the main character, he pretends to enjoy the sex and romance that they share in order to be kept around. He sees himself as
just a means to an end.
Once we reach Act 3, we are finally allowed to actually see Cazador's palace. Astarion visits the places around the mansion, telling the player about the areas until we reach the skeleton that would punish him. We are given a glimpse into the true horror that Astarion used to face, shown the horrible cruelty that his master enforced.
I know you're there, Golly. Stop skulking and show yourself.
You always were sharp, little one. Sharp enough to cut yourself.
You tortured us. For days at a time.
Oh, yes. And you sang so sweetly for me. None of the others screamed like you did.
Baldur's Gate not only addresses regular trauma and human trauma through Astarion, but also explores regular vampire themes in a way that doesn't exactly align with what we are used to. Astarion is obviously a very sexual creature by nature, however, this was forced upon him by Cazador. Typically in vampire media, we see the vampire themselves being sexual as a part of their nature regularly. Astarion does not show this. In fact, throughout multiple meetings with the player character, he shows that sex makes him a little bit uncomfortable, if anything. He, after years of luring people using his body, is now uncomfortable with being used in this way in general. This is a completely flipped idea of what we normally see about vampires, and makes us a little bit more uncomfortable as a viewer. Astarion represents human nature in many ways, not only through sexual trauma and abuse, which is a very large theme for many people, more than most people would be aware of, but he also represents the power to choose his own destiny. When he is allowed to choose his own destiny in this game, you can urge him to either stop the rite completely and to kill Cazador once and for all, completely ruining his chances of ever living a normal life, or you can encourage him to become basically Cazador himself. Not only does Astarion follow the same steps as other abusers would in real life, but Cazador did as well. He was once the abused and became the abuser, and now Astarion has the chance to do the exact same thing, continuing the same line of monsters that has been created. If you choose to allow Astarion to ascend, he immediately becomes power-hungry and almost disconnected with who he once was. There's even an option for the player to tell him he is still who he once was, but he is not. He refers to the player as pet, claiming ownership and seeming to feel like he is now over them and all other creatures, demanding they obey. He turns into a monster, the very same thing he swore to kill, and follows in the same footsteps as his master did with his. He even refuses to take...
At last. See it. At last. Oh, all the lowly creatures of this plane are begging to serve.
Cazador Szar as a villain almost stands for what we usually see in vampire media. Almost a Dracula character of sorts. He is a wealthy, high person in society, and he is incredibly powerful over all thralls that he holds in his power. He also holds a lot of influence over Baldur's Gate as a whole.
Who stands before us? Is this truly our prodigal son? Do not slouch before me, boy. Have you no respect for yourself? Look at you, crawling back after abandoning your family. You should be begging our forgiveness.
Becoming what someone hates is an incredibly human fear that is entirely up to themselves. It is shown through Astarion incredibly well, and as the player it is up to us to decide his fate in the end. Vampire media is often indicative of the fears of the people consuming it, and in this case the player is the one in the end who is forced to make the choice to become evil or become better. People are complex creatures, never black and white, and Astarion is a perfect example of this. Despite his previous actions, forced or not, he is able to either change and make a difference in himself or continue down the same path. We also see themes of abuse and sexual trauma through his eyes, sexuality being twisted from the typical vampire narrative and being shown through the victim's light rather than the abuser.
I am so much more than what you made me. You're right. I can be better than them.
To finish off this video, I'd like to say that Baldur's Gate 3 is one of my favorite games of all time, and I think that Astarion is quite possibly one of the best examples of sexual abuse and trauma that can be shown in a game. I would also like to say that vampires are one of my favorite creatures, and I think that Astarion is a perfect example of the true horror of what being a vampire could really mean. I think that Astarion shows us the fear of being immortal and seeing what living forever can possibly do to someone, especially if we are under the control of someone else. Thank you for watching, and I really hope that you enjoyed it.